So one more time, good morning, everybody. So I've now started recording for this morning, and then I am going to mute everybody just to make sure. And then as you have questions, you can either write them into the chat, or you can raise your hand, and we have a couple of department people that are watching out for comments and questions and hands being raised, and they'll certainly let me know, and then you can unmute yourself, and then if you have your hand raised once you're called on, and then you can ask your question or make a comment, and we'll certainly answer those to the best of our ability. So let me see, I need to, let's see if I can share my screen. Okay, and then, okay. So can everybody see it in presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So as we noted in an email a couple of days ago, we just want to make sure everybody is aware as to what types of expenditures that we're picking up in the model. It does change a little bit by each of the allocations. Some of them pick up more than others, and so we wanted to go through those just to make sure you're aware of what's being picked up, and then that will help you make decisions as you think about how to budget the CARES Act funding. So we'll go through these different 5 allocations that we have, and these are all of our allocations that are informed by expenditures. And so I want to be clear that some of them, well, and any of them, it's not just expenditures that we're looking at. So that's why I want to be very clear in saying informed by expenditures, but not necessarily determined by exactly what you're spending on each of the categories. And so the first one, of course, is CTE. And so we've broken this out a bit by type of expenditure within CTE. So if we look at CTE instruction, co-curricular, and early college programs, there's the program codes that we would be looking at for each of those types of programs. So the 3001 to the 3949, that's where all of your different programs that you're running on a daily basis are listed. The 3950 is where your co-curricular would be, and then 3960 is early college. And within each of those programs, we're going to pick up salaries and benefits, any professional services, program assessment fees. So those are the fees for your kids taking the tests within that program. And then there's a number of other purchase services that we pick up. And so, and professional development and travel, instructional supplies will get picked up, and then any dues and fees. And so just keep in mind, like when we think about the model, supplies actually has a separate allocation from what we're paying out for salaries and benefits for a particular program. And so a lot of these, you'll actually, when you look at how the CTE model is calculated, they don't all fall within the same allocation. But when we want to talk about them as expenditures, we're going to group them together this way so that you understand that, so within when we're thinking about, we're delivering your services, delivering classroom instruction to students, here's within running that classroom, here's what we're going to pick up. And then of course, so we have CTE guidance, health services, and other student services. So program 0000, because these are within the handbook, are considered overhead. And then function 2120, which is for your guidance, 2130 for health services, and then the 2190 to 99 is your other student services. And so what you'll see is and what you'll see throughout, generally speaking, well, within CTE, is you're going to see a lot of the same when we're talking about object codes. So salary and benefits has some particular object codes that it uses, and professional services, and apparently I needed to list professional services twice, but because they're very important apparently. But anyway, so you're going to see a lot of the same things repeated within each category. So the list here is very similar to the list for instruction. There's going to be, on the actual object codes that you can use, there'll be small differences because certain object codes can't be used with function 2120 that can be used with function 1000. But when we're generally talking about it, professional services within guidance is something that we would pick up. So those object codes that you can use, we're going to pick them up as part of this. CTE improvement of instruction and staff training. So again, this is considered overhead. So we see that overhead program code, and then improvement of instruction as a general category, which is 2210, and then more specifically staff training is 2213. And again, so the only thing we're not picking up here, that doesn't appear that we're picking up here, is the salaries and benefits. And so generally speaking, that's because you're actually paying somebody else to provide that service, or if you're using one of your own staff members, their pay is already within a different category. So that's the only little change there, and unless Ida's going to correct me on that. So and then instructional related technology, again, it's overhead, and so we'll use that same program code, function 2230. So here we will have salaries and benefits because you likely have an IT person that's either full-time employed by the center or region, or maybe they're partially coded over to the CT center or region. And so, so one of those two, we may see it a couple of different ways. And then employee training and technology related repair and maintenance, and software related repair and maintenance, and then employee professional development and travel, supplies and books. And so some of these, you're seeing these, this is a little bit different in the sense because we're seeing those software and technology repair and maintenance, and of course down at the bottom, we're seeing that technology, hardware, software, and supplies, and then dues and fees. So I have a private message, and let's, so, and actually, so I'll get to that at the end, because that's a more general question, and I wanted to kind of talk about that anyways. Okay, so CTE Administration, again, so, and I want to back up because I'll have to correct these slides. We're seeing program 0000 for CTE. We actually need to make these program 3000 instead of 0000. So that you would see all of these where I put this 0000, because we are talking about CTE, we actually want to make those 3000. So I want to make sure everybody understands that. So next, we will talk about CTE Administration. Again, so you're going to have a CTE director, whether you're whether you're a center or a region, and and so you'll have a salary and benefits for that category. And so you may have a director, or you'll definitely have a director. You may have an assistant director that's helping out the director, and then you'll have purchase professional services. You'll have supplies, technology needs, and dues. So again, this is, it's fairly similar. One thing I do want to note, and I didn't put a particular slide in here around it, is actually for our CTE regions, we will pick up as well for the business services. So that's going to be, it's going to be very similar to the CTE administration using the function 2400, but for business, we're going to use the function 2500. Operation, maintenance of plant. So we're basically going to pick up within that the program 3000, and then we're going to look at all function codes within operation, maintenance of plant, which is 2600 to 2699. So there's definitely some ways to split up the coding for that. So whether that's for cleaning, whether it's for maintenance, if you're doing some sort of bigger project, then you may be using 2680 or 2690. So within that, we're going to pick up salaries and benefits, the purchase professional development, the purchase property services, which we haven't seen in other locations, but because we're talking about operation, maintenance of plant, we'll pick it up here. Employee professional development and travel, supplies, and then again, another new one, maintenance vehicle fuel, and then dues and fees. And then program transportation. So one thing to be really clear about here is the program is ensuring that it's coded as program transportation. That means we need to code it to the program. So we wouldn't leave it at program 3000, and we wouldn't leave it as an overhead expenditure. We need to code it right to the program, and then just use function 2700. And I know somebody's probably thinking out there, but wait, we have a CTE transportation code. And yes, we do, but so that CTE transportation code is actually used for the coding of moving the students from their home SAU to the CTE center or region. And that's the purpose of that function code. The actual, if you're transporting kids to a job site, or if you have some, maybe because you have a co-curricular, you're moving them around for that, or doing some job shadowing, and so you have some transportation costs for a particular program. So for those, you need to code it right to the program using function 2700. So you do have a couple of different ways that you can do that. So you can put it, you can code the salary and benefits to each program. You could, maybe you're purchasing those transportation services, and you're buying fuel, and and just in general, you may have some dues and fees that may be necessary. And then, or as far as coding the actual cost of the transportation, you can use, there's another function code. And so if you look in the coding that we posted to the CARES Act funding page, you'll see in there how to code just for an actual fee for for the transportation. So this would be the same way that if you have a regular trip transportation for regular ed or special ed, it's the same way that you would do it for that. We have an object code, so you're basically going to figure out what the fee is and then just charge the fee to the program. So moving on to special ed. So I grouped special ed instruction and extended school year into one category for the slides. So And essentially that's going to be any special ed instruction that's occurring in the classroom, that's occurring in a resource room, in a day treatment room, um, for students that's either in the hospital or homebound for 2400, or for your extended school year, which should be coded to 2810, program 2810. And of course, these are all instruction, so we're going to use function 1000. So within that, you can do salaries and benefits, employee training travel costs, contracted service, and tuition would go within these program codes. So some notable exceptions here within, when we look at what the model picks up, we don't pick up any supplies that are bought for special ed, and we don't pick up any equipment that are bought for special ed. So that's, so that's certainly something for everybody to know. And then similarly, when we look at related services, program 2800, function 2110 to 2180. So those are different related services. They're the named services. So, we can kind of think of occupational therapy, physical therapy, psych services, and then speech, and then within there is also social workers. So there's a number of different costs in there. There is another related services that essentially 2190 is other related services. And so I know at times, some other services may be negotiated with an IEP team, and so they may be very well needed. So, we've seen stuff like a horseback riding, or, and I'm trying to think, pool therapy is another one that we've seen in the past. And they, and so certainly I'm not going to suggest that, of whether, those are needed services, but what I'm going to say is they're not services that are picked up within the model. And so again, just like instruction, salary and benefits, employees training, travel costs, and contracted services. And then within special ed, we also have administration specific to special ed. And so that's done with program 2500 and then function 2330. And it's very similar to the other costs within special ed that we pick up. And so of note, this is if you have special ed legal costs, so as much as you may try to avoid it, there's times when you may have to hire legal services in negotiation for services provided under an IEP. And so if you have to hire legal specific to special ed, then you can code those right to special ed. And so again, if you look at our coding sheet, that particular code is listed right in there. It is separate. It's listed separate from other contracted services. Otherwise, this is very similar to our other special ed services as far as what object codes can or are counted. And then lastly, we have early intervention services that may be provided. So there's program 2810 to 2819 is what we look for, and then it has to use the function 2199. And again, very similar object codes as far as salary and benefits, employee training costs, and in contracted services. So then we move on to gifted and talented. So if it's within program 4900 and function 1000, or if you have, this is again some program transportation costs, I don't know how often we actually see those, but we would certainly be looking for those. But keep in mind, you can spend as much as you want in gifted and talented, but as when we are doing the allocation, you are limited to what your approved budgeted amount was. So if you had your budget approved at $100,000 and then you spend $175,000, your allocation is still going to be based on the $100,000 that your budget was approved at. So moving on to transportation. So again, we're going to look at transportation as an overhead cost, and we are going to look at all the function 2700 to 2799. And so I do want to note that a lot of times we get questions around special ed transportation. Man, I've got to transport the special ed student from town X to town Y. It's 50 miles each way. I'm paying out $30,000 a year just to transport this one or two students. It's a huge expense. Why can't I include it in transportation? Why am I not getting money for this particular student, for this cost? And you are getting, those costs are getting picked up. They're just not getting picked up in the special ed state allocation. They're getting picked up in the transportation state allocation instead. So all those, the salary and benefits, the employee training, other professional services that may be needed, technical services, purchase property services, and then supplies, machinery, furniture, and technology that are needed. One thing to note, again, so just like gifted and talented, there's kind of some limits on how this is being done. And so we do a comparison of the previous year's allocation. So, if we're thinking about how we're going to be spending money in fiscal year 21, this is going to affect what you're getting in fiscal year 23. But we are also going to look at your allocation from fiscal year 22. So what's going to end up happening is we're going to look at your expenditures from fiscal year 21. We're going to create a range of 90% to 105%. And so let's say you spend in fiscal year 21 $100,000, just to make things simple. Well, we're going to create that range of 90,000 to 105,000. But let's say your allocation from fiscal year 22 was only $75,000. So because your previous year's allocation fell below that range, you're going to get the 90% of what you had spent 2 years ago, the $90,000. So it does limit how much you can gain each year. So again, as we're thinking about how are we going to spend the CARES Act money, always be thinking about how some of these allocations are being calculated. And okay, so do I want to move this into the CARES Act, or do I want to move this? There's lots of different ways to think about how to spend this money, and just again continue to think about how the different allocations are calculated, so you can make those best decisions to ensure that A, you make good use of the CARES Act money, but B, you can also get the your best bang for the buck in the state funding formula. So again, approved bus purchases, and I want to be very clear. It's an approved bus purchase. So you can certainly work with Pat and buy a bus outside of the funding formula, but she has a particular pot of money for which that she's working with each year, and so she gets in, to my understanding, way more requests in a year than she actually has money to allocate out for. But so any of those buses that are, again, it's overhead, it's function 2700, and then there's a particular object code if you buy that bus outright in the first year, and then there's two other object codes if you make those payments over a period of, anywhere, I think generally it's 3 to 5 years. So there is a 3-year cycle for bus purchases that I think most people are pretty accustomed to. So in the first year, you're going to get that purchase approval so that you can buy that bus in the second year, and then you'll get an allocation for it in the third year. So just always keep that in mind. And I don't know her particular timelines of when she's actually, so if we're talking about fiscal year 21, when are those approvals, when is she looking at those approvals for 21? I'm not exactly sure. So I couldn't really advise on that.
Tyler, she does have a slideshow on the web under bus purchases
Okay.
that specifies the approval process and the timelines and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, and so if you want certainly a much more detailed understanding of that bus approval process, Pat has those slides available. And I think, the point for us today here would be, if you didn't have a bus already in that approval process, and you needed to buy one in fiscal year 21, and you look at Pat's slides and go, oh, I can't do it given, her timelines, again, maybe that's a good purchase for this process if you needed to buy one either this year or next year. But again, I would, certainly, contact Pat first before you went out and bought a bus with the CARES Act funding. Just because, again, maximizing, the state dollars before you're buying something with these particular federal dollars. And that is the end of what I had. I do know I have a couple of messages that I received early on. So I have a message. Would it be in the district's best interest to plan on spending CARES steady across the next 2 years? That way the allocations you are mentioning here that are formed by expenditures would have less of an impact. So I think it's, it's really important to just kind of think about the formulas. And so there may be ways in which, if you had, let's speak of transportation, for instance, if you had to spend a little bit more on transportation, so keep in mind, we're going to create that 90 to 105% range. So if you had to increase your transportation some locally, you can do that calculation yourself to figure out, okay, I can increase it by this much more in my local budget, and all of those expenditures are going to get counted towards that future year allocation. But if I go over this threshold, then those aren't going to be recognized anymore. And then those would be great expenditures to think about for the CARES Act funding. And if you're on the call yesterday, Barbara spoke, quite well about the fact of the special ed funding. So not only thinking about, your MOE for next year, but also think about your MOE for the following year. So if you were to greatly increase your local special ed expenditures in fiscal year 21, because there probably will be some additional challenges that are going to come up, and you may have to spend some more in special ed. But if you start spending more in special ed in fiscal year 21, and then you raise that bar of what you need to spend in special ed down the road, but the needed costs go away, you're still going to be responsible for that additional MOE, that additional special ed in the MOE calculation. So I think especially when we look at special ed, that's probably a very good area to look at, making sure to hold your line on special ed expenditures locally this year, so that you don't, or in the coming year in 21, so you don't get penalized for MOE on the 21 calculation, but also not increasing them more than you can maintain in future years down the road, because then you would just get hit for MOE, for an MOE penalty down the road, and we don't want that to happen either. So it's not just thinking about next year, but it's also thinking about the next 3 to 4 years. And again, I mean, so if we look at gifted and talented program, you probably already have a program approval for fiscal year 21 for your budget for 21. So you locally probably wouldn't want to spend over that. And so if you had some additional expenditures there, again, that might be a good place to spend these funds for that as well. And you know, and one thing we've always, you know, we've kind of put out there is looking at what's not picked up in the CTE model. So a big one is that we don't pick up equipment in the CTE model. So if you had a particular, you know, piece of machinery that really needed to get purchased, you know, that might be a good use for these funds. So it's not just being steady, but it's also just really thinking about how do I best utilize these funds and get, you know, and knowing that I'm probably going to have some additional costs in some particular areas, and how do I best pay for those, making sure to maximize what I get, you know, through the state funding formula, and you know, and then using these funds to kind of, you know, help out along the way in expenditures that you're going to have to incur to support your students. So, and I think Paula already answered it, but I'll mention it just again anyways. You know, so will the slides be shared with us or posted somewhere? So we'll post them within the business manager teams. They'll get posted along with probably or the slides will get posted to the CARES Act funding page. And I can email out this as well to everybody in the group. So I have a question. We had a large purchase to Zoom for licenses. I put that in dues and fees. You consider it software. So there is actually and I might have it up. Give me just a second. So I'm going to reshare my screen. Yep, that one. So this is our FY17 guidance that we had put out. So these are some updates based on some federal guidance that we got. So when we actually have, so within that, a technology software, and I think that might be even, that would probably be a better place. So, and I realize it's an online subscription, but I don't believe there's, well, so there is Classroom Library. Oh, well, that's an internet subscription. But so I tend to think about when we think about software, it is technically software, that, you know, Zoom is technically software. It's a little bit different, but so you could certainly post it to the technology software. You know, so generally when we think about Classroom Library internet subscriptions, it's very similar, except for there's an educational aspect to it, in the sense of they're actually providing the instruction. So I'm trying to, so like my son does CodeSpark, and so that's an actual educational program, and so he's receiving the actual education right through that piece of software. So I would code something like that to the 5340, versus this is more software to as an intermediary to providing that instruction. So then we have a question: what function will curriculum coordinators fall under? Oh, I don't know that one offhand. but we can look that up and get back to you. I'm unless Ida can look it up. If she's unable to look it up, then we'll get back to you on that. So yep, so Paul is answering the question from previously. And then we have a question. To be clear, the sped coding you are discussing in terms of not including supplies expenses is related to what codes are used for generating the ED279s and not maintenance of effort. And the maintenance of effort adds up all special ed expenditures regardless of whether included in the EPS model. Is that correct? So that is perfectly correct. So these are two different calculations. So when we look at the federal maintenance of effort calculation, they are going to include all special ed expenditures, which will include those supplies and equipment. So if you generally bought those items with your general funds in the past, and you're not going to be able to maintain your special ed expenditures without continuing to purchase those in your general fund, then you are going to want to keep those in your general fund. But if you're seeing other increases in special ed and you've historically bought some supplies and equipment with your general fund dollars, so you might be able to make some of that shift into these federal funds, and still maintaining your local effort and maximizing the state formula. So let's see, is the fund code 1000 or does it have its own fund code? So these the CARES Act funding, or what's more specific called the ESSERF funding for the education, it has its own fund code of 2605. So I have another question. Isn't the 7350 for purchasing software versus annual subscriptions for software that might fall under 4320? So we purchased payroll software, actual licenses to own the software versus renting online software for a year. So yeah, I mean, so this, what I'm going to say is it gets, some of these nuances get really tricky. And so a lot of these, I mean, so if you have these individual questions, so we can certainly talk about the individual questions that, as far as how to code one thing versus another, and the background really, can really matter as to how to code it. So 4320, the description says technology related repairs and maintenance. There is also 3520, which is other technology purchase services. So there's a number of different object codes for technology, and so we provided on that guidance, snippets of what the descriptions are, and then we would have to dive into the actual, the larger description to ensure that we're really picking out the correct one. Ida, were you able to find the curriculum coordinator by chance?
So that's what I was just looking up.
Okay.
It's either going to be function 2210 or 2212, and I was just trying to look at the codes to see where they allow for that salary.
Okay. And I don't know if somebody else wants to, and one of our business managers that has a curriculum coordinator might want to chime in on how they code it. I think Ida has some, those are probably within those two, some accurate codes to use.
So a couple people are mentioning that they're using 2210 in the chat.
Okay. So yeah, so Carolyn's mentioning, and Denise is mentioning 2210. So
And Stacy, so that sounds like the consensus.
yeah, and so I'm gonna that probably is right within some of our, so and I'll take a moment to kind of show, as I hope you use on a fairly consistent basis, as you're trying to develop your budgets each year and you have expenses that change. Joanne developed these many years ago, and so we do a fairly decent job at keeping them updated. They always need a little bit of updating here and there, but so on our website, of course, and so let me back out to our main page, to the department's main page. You can go under funding, click budgets and accounting, and then model charts of accounts. And of course, right here at the top is our handbook. And so that's in PDF format now. So you can control F and search for a keyword, or if you happen to know a number, that's always a great way to use that handbook. And then if you know within what program you're trying to find a code, you can always come in here and look, okay, so within regular instruction, here's all the different aspects within regular instruction. And then we've done that for each of the categories. And so that will download an Excel spreadsheet for you to then use for as far as figuring out your coding. So and we even do, of course, adult ed down here, and then if you're looking at major and minor capitals, those are great places to look as well. And I'm going to take a moment as I have my screen shared. We always, of course, get lots of questions around budgets. So all of our budget information is now within this budget and guidance. And then when you're talking about, oh, what do I need to report at the end of the year? It's right here. And then we do tend to get a number of questions around, doing some different things. So specifically, we tend to get a lot of questions around, oh, I want to see what this change will make in my state funding formula. Well, you can do that right here by downloading, oh, not that one, by using the template. If you want to make, you want to know, hey, I want to add 2 teachers, or I want to subtract 2 teachers. You can fill in your current model, and then you can subtract those 2 teachers, but also make sure that you subtract their salaries in that particular case. And so you can make those changes and kind of play around and see what might be your impact. So you can either leave the mill rate consistent, or you can guess at what you think the mill rate will be in the coming year. We also have some other flow charts. So you can kind of start with the function and then find different usable codes. And then and then down here, we actually have a number. We have a series of videos that we've created. So these are great for your board members to kind of understand the funding formula. So as you're making a lot of these decisions, and your board members' eyes maybe start to glaze over on, well, geez, it's going to have this impact on our funding, on our future funding. We created, some really high-level videos, and we have some cameo appearances from previous people in the department or the state board that are in here. And then beyond that, if they want to go slightly deeper beyond the videos, they can come down, and we have a PDF that talks about the whole funding formula. And you can print this out. And so we go into we go into slightly more detail on how the calculations are actually being done. So, so we created these both for you, for superintendents, but also, school board members and community members, just so that they can have an understanding on, a pretty good understanding on how the funding formula works. And so in hoping that, if we have some tough budgets coming up, this may be a way to inform, your board and your community, this is why the administration is suggesting to do this versus what you're suggesting to do. So hopefully that, some of these tools will help you convince, your community and your school board to make the best decision possible for your school district. So that is the end of what I had, and we seem to have gotten through the questions. And so I don't know, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to raise their hand to ask? Okay, so, okay, so Zach, is that, oh, sorry, so I'm getting a question around how to get to the previous meetings. So yes, I can show that again. As I know, we do have different people in each meeting. I'm just trying to minimize some windows so that I can get to the window that I need. And we'll share my screen again. Okay. So again, here's Teams. So this is Microsoft Teams. And so I'm getting a little better at adding people to this. So if you want to get in here, shoot me an email. I can add you into the team. And then I'll send you an email with a link that'll help you get here more directly. To get to the videos of the previous meetings, you need to make sure you're on General, and then come up here and click Files, and then you'll see the previous meetings that have been uploaded. And so I am all up to date on that. And so I just want to know, it's really important that you're on General, because if we came on here and said, oh, I'm going to click Account Coding and click Files, you're not going to get anything. So just keep that in mind. Really important to be on General and then click Files. So, and so we will be posting everything onto the CARES Act webpage. Stop sharing again. So if we don't have anything else, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.